I just finished up my first batch of Cheong, and if you're unfamiliar with what that is, it's a Korean technique to make fruit syrups. It's done by combining equal weights of sugar and fruit, and then over time the liquid is drawn out from the fruit and dissolves the sugar. So here's the whole process from start to finish. If you're new to the channel, this is Recipes with Ben, so let's get going. This batch started in mid-July where I picked up this large cucumber, and the first step was to wash and dry it before cutting it up into slices. And the important thing is I'm going to exclude the two ends of the cucumber as well. Here's the mint I'm going to use, which I picked that day and also washed and dried at the same time as the cucumber. Next up, I'm going to sanitize a 32-ounce mason jar with some Star San, which is a no-rinse sanitizer solution, so I just need to dump it out after spraying it. Now to make this Cheong, I'm going to layer cucumbers to fill about 1/3 of the jar up, and then add some of the mint and finally the sugar, and I'll continue that until the entire jar is filled, and in this case it was the exact right amount to fill this mason jar. I then screwed the lid on top to seal it shut, and gave it a quick shake for whatever reason at this point, and left it in my basement to start working its magic. My plan was to leave it there for a few days, but when I came back 4 hours later, this is what it looked like. A ton of liquid had already come out of the cucumbers, and this is most likely due to the high moisture content they have inside. So at this point, I wanted the cucumbers to sit below the liquid level for two purposes. One, to prevent any mold from forming, and second, to maximize the contact with the sugar. So to accomplish this, I sprayed down a clean glass fermentation weight and pushed it into the jar. This will keep the mint and the cucumber submerged for the rest of the time. One other thing to mention is that at this time you can start to see some bubbles, which indicates there's fermentation activity going on. So to slow that down, I'm going to place this Cheong in my fridge in between updates. So here's the first update, now that it's been about a week since I started it, and most of the sugar has started to dissolve, but there's still a thick, dense layer of sugar at the bottom. So to assist in this process, I'm going to redistribute that sugar into the liquid layer. I'm using tongs to remove the fermentation weight, which I sprayed down beforehand with Star San to eliminate any infection that could occur in the sugary liquid. Then I'm going to pull out a fermentation weight and place it in the bowl that I sanitized beforehand. Next, I'm going to use a cocktail spoon to mix up the sugar, which if you haven't noticed, I'm also going to spray that down right before placing it inside the syrup. Then I'm going to mix everything up into the sugar, scrape the bottom with the spoon, and once that's done, the fermentation weight goes back in the jar to keep everything submerged, and the mason jar will be placed back in the fridge at this time. 10 days later, this is where the cucumber mint Cheong stands, and even more of the sugar is dissolved into the syrup. But to continue this process, I'm going to repeat the same steps I did before. So this means removing the fermentation weight, mixing up the sugar into the syrup with the cucumbers and the mint. At this time I did take a taste to see how it's turning out, and the flavor is coming together nicely. I'm excited to see how the final syrup tastes. But at this point, 2.5 weeks in, it's very mint forward. The fermentation weight goes back into the jar, and then I'll seal it up and place it back in the fridge. Now after about a month of making this Cheong, it's finally done. All the sugar has been completely dissolved, so it's time to separate the syrup from the solids. The first step is to remove the lid, and then using clean tongs again remove the fermentation weight, and I'll put that aside as I don't need it moving forward. Next, I'm going to use a tea strainer to catch all the cucumber mint as I pour the syrup into a second clean mason jar. Then once all the syrup is transferred, I'm going to use this muddler to push down any syrup stuck to the cucumbers at this point. Now it's time for a taste test of the final results. To me, the initial flavor is very mint in a very refreshing way. There's an obvious sweetness that comes from the sugar, and finally the cucumber kind of rounds out the syrup to give it more of an earthy component to balance out the sweetness in the mint. Let me know down in the comments what you think this would be good in, and thank you for watching. If you made it to the end, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you again soon.